Today I'm speaking with Cielo. She speaks to me about her false positive Down syndrome diagnosis and false IUGR, intra-uterine growth restriction label that created a lot of anxiety within her first pregnancy journey. Cielo was switched to obstetrics care to monitor the pregnancy. Then at 38 weeks, her OB started talking induction. After Cielo's waters spontaneously released and she entered into the hospital before the actual induction was due to take place, she was met with very abusive and very traumatic treatment. And because of this, Cielo had a cesarean section for quote-unquote failure to progress. Cielo then got pregnant a second time, which ended in an early pregnancy release at 10 weeks. This short pregnancy allowed Cielo to close the hormonal response that was missing during her first birth and to bring closure to that first experience free of trauma. Cielo got pregnant once again shortly after the pregnancy release and went on to have a wild pregnancy and birth where she was connected to and in her total power. Listen to this wonderful F-back, Freebirth after Cesarean story of healing and Cielo's reconnection to her strength as a woman and mother. Hello, Cielo. Welcome to the Free Birthing in Color podcast. I'm so grateful that you're here. Yeah, and you've got your little one. What's your daughter's name again?
Cirilla.
Cirilla. Wow, that's so beautiful. So,
Thank you.
hi, Cirilla. So I think we'll just jump right into it. So the first question that I'm going to ask you is, what is your ancestry and your lineage that you're going to be passing on to your daughter?
I am Filipino on both my parents' sides. My mom and my dad are from the city of Cebu, which is south of Manila, for anyone that's familiar with what the Philippines looks like. And my mom immigrated to Canada in 1974.
Wow.
She was the last of 7 siblings to come over with my grandma. They started, I believe they started in the 60s. One sister got a job here and was able to sponsor everyone else to come over.
Mm.
And then my parents got married in the 80s in Canada. And so I was born here. But I guess my family is sort of split up between like North America and the Philippines. There's still a large number of people that are there, and my dad is there.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then my daughter, actually, so my husband is Chinese, from mainland China.
Mm.
And he was born there and moved to Canada in, I think, 1998.
Okay. Wow.
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, well, thank you for saying that and letting us know, about your history and all of that and your family line. And the next question I'm going to ask you then is, where does your motherhood journey start? And yeah, just share any relevant information on your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum experiences.
Okay, so I was pregnant. This is my second child. I had a son in 2019, December. And so the first time I was pregnant was March of 2019, and it was unplanned. My husband and I had just gotten back from a 3-week vacation in Europe, and like we both weren't feeling well. And then I kind of just kept not feeling well for a week. I'm sorry, like from a week to 4 weeks. And then I ended up finding out that my period was late, and found out that I was pregnant. And we were like all the feelings, like excited and scared, and we were happy, but I was very anxious for that pregnancy. I guess partly because it was unplanned and I didn't really know what to expect. Not many of my friends had kids yet, and I have a lot of cousins with kids, but they're all 10 years older than I am, so they've done this, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
And so with that pregnancy, I went straight into the allopathic system. I hadn't really known anyone in like my personal life that had chosen any other options other than birthing in the hospital. Not in my generation anyway. I kind of want to get into what I know about my mom's generation, what I've come to learn about it since then. But
Absolutely.
from what I know, like from what I knew then, um, everyone just went to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So, I booked an appointment with my doctor, did the initial blood tests, and I opted in for the first trimester genetic screening. So they screen for things like Down syndrome and the other trisomies, but it's not a diagnostic result. It's like it'll tell you if you have a higher risk of having any of those things. And it actually also tells you more than that, but I wasn't aware of this when I opted into it. So that the blood test came back with a marker for a higher percent of Down syndrome. It was 1 in 15, whereas normally I think it's like 1 in something like 800, maybe 1500. So it was like alarming. And at the time I had signed up with a midwifery clinic because a friend of mine, like my only friend that had had kids at that time, her one piece of advice was like, I kind of wish I had looked into midwives instead of going with an OB. So I decided to go that route. But I was still like, it wasn't because I was looking for an alternative choice. Like I was still expecting a very sort of medicalized experience the whole way through.
Right.
So that result, the first trimester genetic screening with that higher chance of Down syndrome kind of set me on the path to keep going in for more testing and checking to see if things were okay, because there would always be something that was like, this is not like ideal, so maybe you should do this type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up switching from the midwifery clinic because I didn't like the bedside manner. I was given those results, the down like the high risk for Down syndrome results over the phone. And I wasn't expecting that.
No.
And the way that it was delivered like wasn't very informative, and she kind of just told me, well, we're gonna send you to a geneticist and you can like discuss it with them in like a week's time. So I was supposed to like mull over it for a week. I ended up getting a friend's dad who's an obstetrician to expedite the testing. So I went on to do the NIPT test to confirm whether or not there was Down syndrome, and it came back negative. But I was already sort of hooked into this idea that things were not going to be okay.
Right.
So I switched to an OB and went on to do the 20-week ultrasound. And I think at that point they started getting concerned about the size of the baby. And because I had had that first marker in that first blood test, it was just like the list of things that they were concerned about just kept getting longer, and it was given to me as more of a reason to do more ultrasounds and come in for like the stress test and all that stuff. And it was a very, very anxious pregnancy.
Absolutely. That sounds really awful. You get roped in and then it's just like you can't leave because they'll always find a new reason as to why you have to stay and do more stuff.
Yeah, like that was it, 100%. And it's funny because I wasn't really scared of the giving birth part. It was always about how it was going to be managed for me. Like that was what felt unknown to me. And I had a doula for that pregnancy, and she has gone on to become a traditional birth attendant. So she only attends births out of the system. But at the time, it was kind of like we were going through the same, I don't know, awakening sort of thing, because I ended up being one of her last few births that were in the hospital because she just couldn't take what she was seeing anymore.
Right.
And so with her, like the support that I got from her, that was what I wanted, but I didn't know how to shift out of feeling like I needed like to do all the medical things. Like in the allopathic system.
Mhm.
So come 38 weeks, they're still concerned about the baby being IUGR. And my doctor started talking about induction.
Yes.
And it was frustrating to me. Sorry. Oh, that's my, I need this. Sorry. Because throughout the whole pregnancy, he had never mentioned anything about induction. And retrospectively, it kind of felt like he did that on purpose, like bringing it up only at the end so that I would have less time to contemplate and like do research about it.
Totally. Yeah.
Because at 38 weeks, I was like, why all of a sudden are you talking about this? Like, it did not feel right. It didn't feel like something that I wanted to do. It didn't feel necessary. But I really didn't know how to advocate for like my own instinct.
Mhm.
So we were talking about like setting up the dates for the induction, and then my water ended up breaking like the week of, and I ended up going in because well, I didn't realize that if you go in with your water broken, they're not going to let you go home. They're going to advise that you stay there.
Mhm.
So I kind of got stuck, and I go in, they confirm that my water is broken. I have my first cervix check ever, and it was terrible.
Oh.
Like my doula had explained to me that that it's going to be uncomfortable, but like until you like actually go through it, you don't really realize what the process is. And I'm like 5 feet tall, and the nurse that checked me is the same, like was like the same size as me, and I can remember her like having to like force like take extra force to take the measurement, and it was so uncomfortable. Yeah. And
Do you
prior to
sorry, do you think that maybe as she was giving you a cervical check, she was sweeping your membranes as well?
not at this time, not for
Okay.
this time. Yeah. But I did start bleeding after that, which just added to like how anxious I was feeling. And I spoke to my doctor. He happened to be on call at the hospital that day, and I was like, please, can I just put off the induction like for as long as possible? So he agreed, and I was allowed to like walk around the hospital for something like 7 hours. I got there at 7 in the morning, and I was walking around till like 4, and it didn't do anything because I was so like just I did not feel safe. I did not feel
Mhm.
confident or comfortable at all. And that's not how labor starts. Those are not the conditions under which your body goes into labor.
Mhm.
So I go back to the maternity ward, and my doctor comes in to do a check. And at this check is when he attempted to do a sweep without telling me.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, it was really awful. Like, sorry, cervix check to begin with. I might need to get that. Sorry, can I take a moment?
Yeah, I'll just pause.
Yeah, so the cervix check to begin with is uncomfortable, and then to have someone take it a step further, like it's really painful having a stretch.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I didn't know that that was coming because I never consented to it.
Right.
And while it was happening, I can remember digging my heels into the bed and trying to push myself the other way.
Oh.
And I yelled, like, are you just checking or are you doing something else?
Mhm.
And he took his hand out, and he looked really like flustered and nervous. And he's like, I just did a mini stretch. You're not even 1 centimeter dilated.
Mm.
And
Oh.
at the time, like, I didn't say anything about it. I was really pissed, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to get this process over with. It didn't feel like I had like the capacity to focus on what just happened because my body is like trying to go into labor.
Yeah, and your body
So,
got like randomly traumatized. I'm so sorry
yeah,
that happened.
yeah.
That's just makes me sick to my stomach.
Thanks. And it wasn't even like I guess that was the start of it, but I also had a few interactions with the nurses that were on staff. I got into a shouting match about going to the bathroom because I ended up getting induced via Pitocin, and they had me hooked up to the IV on the cart, and it it was so uncomfortable, and I needed to go. Like, I needed to go take a poop, and um I went, like, I didn't ask anyone, and I went, and a nurse came in and started yelling at me to get back in bed, and I was like, I'm almost done here.
Yeah.
Like I'll get back in bed, just like let me finish in the washroom. And
Mhm.
she ended up getting someone else to come back with her, so then I had two people yelling at me.
Oh,
And yeah, and they got me back in bed, they checked the heartbeat, and it was totally fine. But it broke my focus,
mhm.
and I had been trying to not get the epidural, but after this point, like, after like being yelled at and having like the Pitocin contractions going, like, I couldn't take it anymore.
Of course.
So
Oh my goodness. Wow.
yeah, and so it ended up being an emergency C-section, or failure to progress,
Mm.
because I never dilated past 4 centimeters. And um I had the section, and my son ended up being low glucose, so he had to stay in the NICU for less than 48 hours. And breastfeeding was really hard because of that, because we weren't with each other for
Mhm.
those first few moments. And like that feeling of not knowing if I was doing the right thing, um in terms of like the pregnancy, just carried on through the
Oh,
postpartum time, because every time anything came up with my son, like, I wasn't able to sort of tap into my own intuition. I was just really anxious
right.
about everything.
Yeah.
Um, and so, it was really hard. I want to say, like, the first 8 months or so, because I ended up going to do EMDR therapy
Mhm.
for that whole experience, and it really helped. And in that time as well, I ended up finding the Freebirth Society podcast, and just listening to a bunch of stories
Mhm.
similar to mine, way worse than mine,
Mm.
and just hearing about how women, what they decided to do afterward, and it gave me a lot of hope. And I ended up taking the radical birthkeeper course as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just, not necessarily to like end up attending births, but because I just wanted to know what women were doing instead of going to the hospital, because there was no way, if I was going to have another kid, that I would choose to do the same thing.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, with this one, um, it's my son is a year and a half. It's like 2021 now, and um, I'm like dead set on having her at home. But I didn't know how I would want to go about doing that. Like, I didn't know who to ask for help. So the school really helped with that. And I ended up finding a traditional birth attendant um, that I hired. And then I found out I was pregnant in September of 2022. And I
Okay.
ended up miscarrying in October. So it was 10 weeks. And it was really sad, but that pregnancy, although it was short, was almost not in the system. I did do the initial blood test
Mhm.
just to check sort of iron levels and vitamin D, and see if there was anything I needed to do, um, like nutrition wise. But
Mhm.
everything was like fine, and it just wasn't like a viable pregnancy. And it was so sad. Like I was really heartbroken
Mhm.
um, for a good like couple months. But I also think it did something for me hormonally that didn't happen after my C-section, because on some like biological level, I didn't get closure
Mm-hmm.
after the section because it's just like all these traumatizing things happened, and then I got separated from my son. But the miscarriage, like, it happened as my body was designed to allow it to happen. There was no interference. It wasn't traumatic in the same way that the section was.
Right. And so you had that baby release at home?
Hmm.
And was it by yourself or did you have that traditional birth attendant
I
with
was I
also?
was by myself. I had her like I was texting with her, so she did, advise on like what herbs to take, and it went like it was not complicated at all. It was just like a heavy period.
Mhm.
Um and yeah, and after that happened, something shifted because I was sort of like really desperate to get pregnant again and go through everything again because I didn't want that experience in the hospital with my son to be my only experience with birth.
Mhm.
But it wasn't like almost wasn't like a healthy way of trying to get pregnant again because I was very anxious about it still. But after the miscarriage, I kind of relaxed about it. Like I was more accepting of whatever was
Mhm.
gonna come.
Yeah,
And
that's beautiful. Because it really, like you said, goes to show that there probably was some sort of energetic, spiritual opening when you were pregnant with your first babe, and then it just never, you never got to complete that loop. And so you fully got to go through that whole kind of pregnancy, even though it was only 10 weeks, that pregnancy, and then that birth experience, even though it ended very soon, you still were able to kind of knit all of those things back together. And
yeah.
yeah, that's really beautiful that you can have an experience like an early pregnancy release, a miscarriage, and it also turn out to be something more than just, losing a baby. It can actually bring in so much more deeper healing for what you needed from that previous birth experience.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about it.
Yeah, that's
And
cool.
it's a little sad because it's not an easy subject to talk about, and nobody really talks about it in that way, if you know what I mean. Like it's very taboo, but I'm grateful that it happened because it kind of created the space I needed to allow
Mhm.
this pregnancy to happen. And with her, you know, I got pregnant again 3 months after, 3 cycles after the miscarriage, and that pregnancy was completely wild. I didn't have a single blood test, a single prenatal appointment in a hospital. Like, I did have two um, birth attendants.
Mhm.
So chatty. I
Mhm.
did have two birth attendants, and I met with them like throughout the pregnancy just to talk about like my mental health and how I felt, and it was such a different experience. Like I was much more relaxed.
Good.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful for it. And I did have one fear um about the birth because I sort of taught myself how to palpate myself, and I bought a fetoscope, so I was able to find her heartbeat. And I you know I guessed from that her positioning was transverse, like she wasn't head down at any point. Oh, sorry, what's wrong? You hungry? Yeah, she was sideways for most of it, and I had been telling my birthing team, this is not your ideal nap spot, huh? Sorry, bud. I had been telling my birth team that, oh, I think she's gonna be breech, because she's sideways. I was saying it up until they came to my house that day,
Mhm.
and so I scared everybody. I scared my husband, I scared my doula, and I didn't know this because they came over, but they kind of like left me alone the whole time. And they knew that that's what I wanted. I had told them like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna call you or if I'm gonna want to just call you after the baby comes. And I ended up calling them because the contractions were like more than I was expecting. Um, and I don't know, I kind of made up in my head that it wasn't going to be as bad as the Pitocin contractions because I had heard that those are really rough and unnatural, but they were pretty intense still.
Yeah.
So I called them and they came out, like they took their time coming over, and they stayed downstairs mostly. And my doula was apparently like messaging the birth attendant that I had hired the last time, like asking about breech. Everybody was like looking up breech on YouTube. and she ended up flipping like at the last minute because she came out head first.
Yeah.
And it was intense, but I think active labor was only like 8 hours. It was like 9 to 5, and she ended up coming out in my bathtub, and it was crazy, like just a crazy experience. The fetal ejection reflex happened, and that doesn't mean that it wasn't like intense as she came out, but it was very like I just had to like go with the flow.
Yeah.
And as soon as she was out, like I was just like not here. Like I was so high. The birth high kicked in, and it was great.
And so I just want to ask a couple questions then. So within this second pregnancy or this third pregnancy that led to this baby here and now, when you spoke about this to your partner, like, and you weren't having any medical testing during the pregnancy, like, how did he take that? Or was he nervous about, your previous birth with your son and thinking the same things could kind of happen? Or was he just, I'm happy to do and support you in however you want to bring this baby through?
He was very accommodating of whatever I wanted to do. And I think this is because he like the whole journey from sort of recovering from that first experience, he was with me every step of the way. Like anytime that I learned something or heard something on a podcast, I would talk to him about it. And so it wasn't really news to him by the time I got pregnant with this one. And he was concerned about like, the possibility of an emergency. But we did do a workshop with that first birth attendant you want to talk to.
Yeah.
And so we did do a workshop, and it was all maybe like 6 couples that were planning on birthing at home, and he was able to ask questions there. And I think he was just worried about the baby coming out and not breathing. And then at that workshop, he learned for the first time that if the cord is intact, that's how the baby is oxygenated. And at that workshop, he was like, oh, like, so as long as the baby is like still connected to the placenta, like he or she's got oxygen. And the birth attendant was like, yeah. And he was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And then going through that wild pregnancy experience also, did you have any fears because you would be a VBAC mother? And I know that there is a lot of fear that gets input onto women that are wanting to have a vaginal birth after their cesarean. So did you feel any of that, or did it just not matter to you, and you just knew like, I'm doing this way, it doesn't matter if I've had a cesarean, this baby is coming out through my vaginal canal, and there's just no ifs, ands, or buts?
I think from what I'd learned about like the risks around VBAC, to me, doing it at home would have been the best like opportunity for that to happen, the safest way for that to happen. I did talk to my doctor, like my family doctor, after my C-section, and I think I asked him about that, and he was like, you can totally attempt a VBAC, but it has to be at the hospital just in case something happens, because if you have a rupture, it's minutes that you have to address that. But what that opinion doesn't address is the fact that if you go to the hospital, you're not going to have the space to allow the pregnancy to happen as it would need to not need intervention.
Exactly.
it's the act of intervening that actually increases the risk of rupture.
Yes.
And so in my head, if I'm at home and I don't have any of those people that were around for the first birth, and there's no chance of interacting with anyone in that way, then what could go wrong is kind of what I was thinking.
Perfect. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. And then when you birthed your baby in your bathtub, so was your younger son there? Was your husband there? Or was it just you completely by yourself in your total power bringing this baby through?
No, my husband was there, and we did end up, I think he had daycare that day, and he ended up going to his grandma's house afterward.
Okay.
Yeah, so he wasn't home for it. And then I did have my doula is the one that caught her in the tub.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And then how was this postpartum experience comparative to the first one?
So much better. The breastfeeding went so much easier. Like I think just intuitively everything worked out better because I wasn't looking up how long they were supposed to be feeding for or counting diapers. Like she ate and she peed and she was alert and happy, and there was just no reason to have to measure it against a standard. And because I wasn't doing that, it was just less stressful.
Right.
And like the sleep was pretty good too up until 2 months. She was like sleeping through the night at 2 months, and because we co-slept, I slept whenever she slept. So yeah, it's a lot easier. The toddler part was difficult. The transition for my son was a little hard at the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Wow, that's such a beautiful story. And yeah, to just see that change from cesarean, even the miscarriage, how it turned out to be such a beautiful experience, and then to go complete wild pregnancy and rebirth with this babe is just so amazing to hear this gradual transformation of you as a woman and a mother.
And I think I want to add, just because you asked about ancestry at the beginning. When I was pregnant with her, and I was, I did tell my mom what my plan was to be at home, and that I think I told her that I had a midwife. I just didn't like elaborate on what kind. And her first reaction, like her initial reaction was, "Oh, did you know that I was born at home?" And I was like, "Oh no, I didn't know that." So apparently my grandma had all 8 of her kids at home in the Philippines.
Wow.
Yeah, and I realized actually that I had met the woman that attended my mom's birth as the midwife, but I didn't know that she was the midwife. And unfortunately, she's passed away at this time, so I can't ask her about it. But that would have been really cool.
Wow. So then did your mom, you said your mom had home births as well because she was born at home?
She was born at home, but I was born in the hospital here.
Oh, but you were, okay, sorry, I misunderstood that. Okay, and wow, okay. Your grandmother had 8 home births.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And like my husband's paternal grandmother, same thing, like 9 births at home. And so I don't know, I loved learning that because statistics wise, if C-sections are 1 in 3, that's not reflected at all in those numbers. So.
Yeah. Wow, that's so amazing. And I mean, just knowing that ancestral power of the women behind you, even though you didn't know it at the time of your birth, just figuring it out, knowing that energy was there probably with you in this most recent birth experience.
Yeah.
So wonderful. And I mean, now you've got that, your daughter will have that. And if you have more children, that energy will be infused into those pregnancy and birth experiences.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful, really full circle with that whole with it all. Wow. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about your birthing experiences or postpartum experiences?
No, I don't think so. Just that, yeah, they were very, very different. And if I were to have another, I would definitely go about it the same way as I did with this one.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for having me come on and talk about it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those stories. They were absolutely wonderful. And if you would like to share, like, do you have a website or Instagram if women wanted to reach out to you and speak to you more personally, if you want to share that information now?
Sure. On Instagram, I'm at cie.leo.
Wonderful. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Cielo. Okay, so we're back just for a little second half here to talk about your traditional birth attendant and the care that she gave you afterwards with your placenta.
Yeah, so Ninaru, one of my birth attendants, she has this placenta offering where she can take your placenta and process it into skincare products, or she can also put them into pills. But so I opted for the products, and I ended up getting a body butter, face mask, and a facial oil.
Wow.
And so it was nice to have that and incorporate that into the post period, because like I was able to like use it all over, and it was just nice because I didn't get to even see my placenta the first time around, so it just felt better, like incorporating it into my experience.
Totally.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's so beautiful. I never would have thought to put it into like body butters and facial oils, but you hear like this whole like harvesting placentas, and they do that. So I mean, you might as well use your own and use it for your own body and your own, skincare and connect.
If anyone wants to look her up, she is at the creator of light, the creator of light on Instagram. Instagram.
No, I think it's Chi of Life or Key of Life, isn't it?
Oh, Key of Life is her birth page. You're right. Yes. Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put her information in the show notes as well, also with yours. But yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I think women should know that that's a possibility, that they can encapsulate their placentas and have them in pills or for their body regime as well. It's just another way of connection to you and the spirit of your babe. Excellent. All right, so we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, Cielo.
Thank you.
Thank you, sisters, so much for listening to this episode of the Freebirthing in Color podcast. If you'd like to work with me one-on-one in a primal activation session, donate to the podcast, or to have your story featured here or in the blog, go to primalwomanportal.com for all the information to do so. Did you want to connect with our guest speaker? You can find all her information linked within the show notes. And if you have time, please subscribe, write a review, and tell a friend to have a listen, so that this podcast and these stories of women birthing in their total power can be shared far and wide. Don't forget to check out the show notes for information on the Earth Daughters Women's Festival, the Breach Without Borders workshop, and much more. New episodes drop every Thursday morning, so stay tuned for the next amazing story to be shared on any platform that you prefer to listen to your podcasts on, or watch these episodes on the Freebirthing in Color YouTube page. And remember, your voice and your story matters. So if you're a woman of color or an Indigenous woman who's had a wild pregnancy and or birth outside of the medical system, submit your story, because it's so important that your voice is heard and celebrated in your radical journey of pregnancy, birth, and motherhood.